The rain strikes the roof of my cabin differently on nights like this. Have you ever noticed how rain can sound almost deliberate sometimes? Each drop plays with precision, like fingers tapping out a code, a message, a warning. I've been a forest ranger at Blackwater National Park for nearly 2 decades now. It's a vast stretch of wilderness, old-growth forests, mist-shrouded valleys, mountains that disappear into cloud more often than not. Beautiful country, if you respect it. Deadly, if you don't. Most visitors stick to the well-marked trails, the designated camping areas. They take their photographs, have their little adventures, and leave with nothing worse than a few mosquito bites and some pleasant memories. But Blackwater has its secrets, its hidden places, areas that don't appear on any official map, that rangers speak of only in hushed tones during night shifts. The locals have names for these places: Whispering Hollow, Crooked Mile, the Nowhere Pine. But the one that concerns this story is known simply as the Hollow, a circular depression deep in the northwestern quadrant, perhaps half a mile across, ringed by trees so ancient they were already old when the first European settlers arrived. Something about the Hollow has always felt wrong. The air there is too still. Sounds travel oddly or not at all, and even on the brightest summer day, the light that filters through the canopy seems weak and gray, as if coming from a much more distant sun. Wildlife avoids it. Rangers do too, when possible. But sometimes people wander in. It was late October, 7 years ago. The tourist season had wound down. Leaves were falling, and the autumn rains had set in. Not the dramatic thunderstorms of summer, but a steady, relentless drizzle that could last for days, turning trails to mud and creeks to rushing torrents. I was working the evening shift at the main ranger station when the call came in. A young woman, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, reporting that her brother had returned from a day hike. He was only supposed to be gone for a few hours, she explained, words tumbling out in a rush. He wanted to photograph the valley in the rain, said the mist would make for dramatic shots, but it's been nearly 12 hours, and he's not answering his phone. I took down the details. Jason Miller, 26, experienced hiker and amateur photographer. He'd parked at the Blackwater Valley Trailhead that morning, intending to follow the Ridge Trail to Lookout Point, a popular spot for landscape photography. His sister had become concerned when darkness fell, and he hadn't returned or made contact. Standard procedure for missing hikers is to wait until morning before initiating a search, especially in poor weather conditions where sending out rangers might put more lives at risk. But something in the woman's voice, an edge of fear that went beyond normal concern, made me decide to at least check the trailhead, see if Miller's vehicle was still there. I'll drive out and have a look, I told her. If his car is still at the trailhead, we'll organize a proper search team for first light tomorrow. Please find him, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Jason knows these trails. He wouldn't just get lost. Something's wrong. I can feel it. I drove out to Blackwater Valley Trailhead as the last light faded from an already gloomy sky. The rain, which had been steady all day, intensified as I arrived, drumming on the roof of my vehicle, reducing visibility to just a few yards beyond my headlights. The small gravel parking area was empty except for a single car, a blue Honda Civic, that matched the description Miller's sister had given. I checked the registration through the window to confirm. This was definitely his vehicle, and it had clearly been here for some time. The windscreen was covered with a fine layer of water droplets and fallen pine needles. I radioed back to the station, reporting my findings and requesting a search team be assembled for dawn. Then, against my better judgment, I decided to do a preliminary sweep of the immediate trail area. If Miller had been injured close to the trailhead, he might be within earshot, and if he was exposed to these conditions all night, I pulled on my rain gear, checked my torch, and set out along the ridge trail. The path was slick with mud and fallen leaves, treacherous in the growing darkness. My torch beam seemed feeble against the encompassing gloom, barely illuminating a few yards ahead. The rain muffled all sound except its own relentless patter. Jason Miller. I called every 100 yards or so. Park Ranger, can you hear me? My voice sounded flat, directionless in the dense, rain-soaked air. No response came but the steady drumming of water on leaves. I'd gone perhaps half a mile when I found the first sign that something was amiss. A professional camera lens, high-end by the look of it, half buried in mud beside the trail. I picked it up carefully, noting that it appeared undamaged apart from being wet. Not dropped in a fall or panic, but deliberately placed. Strange. I continued on, now calling Miller's name more frequently, my unease growing with each unanswered call. The ridge trail climbed steadily, switchbacking up the steep slope toward Lookout Point. In good weather, it offered spectacular views across the valley. Tonight, it would show nothing but darkness and sheets of rain. About a mile from the trailhead, I found something else. A camera tripod, its legs folded, leaning with deliberate precision against a tree trunk beside the path. Like the lens, it showed no signs of damage. No indication it had been abandoned in haste or accident. It had been placed. I was contemplating this oddity when I noticed something else. Footprints leading off the marked trail into the dense forest to my right. Not the random wandering of someone lost, but a straight, purposeful line, as if the person who made them knew exactly where they were going, which made no sense. There was nothing in that direction but trackless wilderness, becoming increasingly rugged and difficult to navigate as it approached the part of the forest that contained. I hesitated, tore between protocol and instinct. Protocol said to mark the location, return to my vehicle, and report my findings to the search team coordinator. But instinct, some ranger's sixth sense developed over years in these woods, told me that Jason Miller had gone this way, following some purpose known only to himself, and might still be within reach. I made a compromise with myself. I would follow the tracks for 15 minutes. If I found no further sign of Miller in that time, I would turn back and wait for the full search team at dawn. I stepped off the trail, following those deliberate footprints into the trees. The forest closed around me almost immediately, branches hanging low with the weight of rain, undergrowth grabbing at my legs, as if trying to impede my progress. My torch beam bounced off wet leaves and bark, creating shifting shadows that seemed to move independently of my light's motion. The footprints remained clear, which surprised me given the heavy rainfall. They should have been washing away, becoming indistinct. Instead, they looked freshly made, as if the ground itself was preserving them, wanting them to be followed. 10 minutes into my self-imposed time limit, the character of the forest began to change. The trees grew larger, older, their trunks twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. The undergrowth thinned, giving way to a carpet of moss that glowed faintly in my torch beam with an unnatural phosphorescence. And the rain changed too, not in intensity, but in quality. Each drop became distinct, separate from the others, falling with precision that rain should not possess. Each landing with a sound like a soft footstep, a tiny echo that lingered too long. I knew where I was heading now. The hollow. Somehow, in just minutes, I'd covered ground that should have taken hours to traverse. The land was drawing me in, using Miller's tracks as bait. bringing me to a place I'd always instinctively avoided. I should have turned back. Every rational thought, every protocol, every training manual said to retreat, to wait for daylight and backup. Instead, I continued forward, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't name. The ground began to slope downward, gently at first, then more steeply. The massive trees grew more widely spaced, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy overhead. The rain here was different again, slower, heavier, each drop striking the ground with a sound like a whispered word in a language just beyond comprehension. And then I saw it, a soft, pulsing light ahead through the trees. Not the harsh white of a torch or lantern, but something gentler, bluer, with a rhythmic quality that matched the now audible beating of my heart. I approached cautiously, one hand on my radio, thumb poised over the emergency button. The trees parted before me, revealing a perfect circle of open ground, the hollow, and at its center, the source of that pulsing blue light. It wasn't anything I could have anticipated or prepared for. Not a fire, not a piece of equipment, not anything manufactured or natural. It was a vertical tear in the air itself, a jagged line of blue-white light that stretched from ground to about 7 feet up, hovering in empty space like a crack in reality. It pulsed in perfect time with my heartbeat, widening slightly with each beat, as if breathing in counterpoint to my own lungs. And before it, kneeling as if in prayer or supplication, was a man, Jason Miller, I presumed, though I could see only his back, the dark jacket his sister had described, the camera bag slung across his shoulder. "Miller?" I called, my voice sounding strange in the unnaturally still air of the hollow. "Jason Miller?" "Park ranger." "Are you all right?" He didn't respond, didn't turn, didn't give any indication he'd heard me. Just continued to kneel before that impossible tear in reality, his posture suggesting complete absorption. I approached slowly, painfully aware of the wrongness of this place, of that pulsing light, of Miller's unnatural stillness. The rain fell around us but not on us, creating a perfect circle of dryness in the center of the hollow, as if the tear was somehow holding it at bay. "Miller," I tried again, now just a few yards away. "I need you to come with me. Your sister is worried. It's not safe here." Still no response. I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. He was cold, not the chill of someone who's been exposed to the elements, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to radiate outward from his core. And he was utterly rigid, his body locked in that kneeling position, as if frozen or petrified. "Miller?" I said again, gently turning him to face me. What I saw wasn't a face, not really. It was as if someone had taken a photograph of a human face, and then slowly, methodically erased the features, leaving only the faintest impressions where eyes, nose, and mouth should be, a suggestion of humanity rather than the real thing. And yet, somehow he spoke. "Can you see it?" The voice emerged from that featureless expanse, the not-quite mouth moving in ways that seemed geometrically impossible. "Can you see what's on the other side?" I looked at the tear, that pulsing vertical line of light. For a brief moment, as it widened on what must have been my heartbeat, I thought I glimpsed something beyond, a landscape like and unlike our own. Trees that resembled trees but bent in ways that defied physics. A sky that might have been a sky, but was filled with shapes that hurt my eyes to look upon. Movement that suggested life, but of a kind I had no context to understand. "We need to go," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Now, this place isn't safe." Miller's head tilted at an angle no human neck should permit. "Safe," he repeated. The word stretched and distorted. What does that mean in the face of what lies beyond? They're waiting for us. They've been waiting so long. Who has? I asked, unable to stop myself. The not-quite mouth curved into what might have been a smile. The others, the ones who went before, the ones who found the hollows between the trees. He gestured toward the tear with a movement too fluid to be natural. Look closer. You can see them if you try. Against every instinct, I found myself looking more intently at the pulsing tear. As if responding to my attention, it widened further, revealing more of that impossible landscape beyond. And yes, there were figures there, human-shaped, but wrong in subtle ways, limbs too long or too jointed, movements too fluid or too jerky, faces that weren't quite faces, and they were looking back at me, seeing me, recognizing me. One raised a hand in what might have been greeting. The gesture was familiar in a way that sent ice through my veins. It was my own gesture, the casual wave I use when passing fellow rangers on park trails. This thing, whatever it was, had seen me before, had been watching me. They remember you, Miller said, his voice now coming not just from his ruined face, but from the air around us, from the ground beneath our feet, from the tear itself. They remember everyone who passes near the hollows, and eventually everyone finds their way in. He reached for my hand with fingers that seemed to bend in too many places. Come with me. See what I've seen. Become what I'm becoming. I stumbled backward, breaking contact with that cold, rigid form. Miller made no move to follow, just continued to watch me with that featureless face, that suggestion of a smile. Others will come looking for you, he said, his voice fading as I retreated. Others always do. And then there will be more of us, more eyes to see, more hollows to open. I fled. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran blindly through the dark forest, heedless of direction, driven by a terror so profound it bypassed thought entirely. I don't know how long I ran, or how I found my way back to the ridge trail. I remember only fragments, crashing through undergrowth, slipping in mud, branches whipping against my face. When I finally staggered back to my vehicle, dawn was breaking, a gray, reluctant light filtering through the still-falling rain. I sat in the driver's seat, shaking uncontrollably, trying to process what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. The search team arrived an hour later. I reported finding Miller's camera equipment, but said nothing of the hollow, the tear, the not-quite-human thing Miller had become. Instead, I guided them along the ridge trail to where I'd found the lens and tripod. The footprints leading off-trail were gone, washed away by the rain. I told myself, though I knew the ground had been preserving them despite the downpour. The search team spread out, working in a grid pattern outward from the last known location. They found nothing. No sign of Jason Miller. No further equipment. No evidence he'd ever left a marked trail. After 3 days of intensive searching, the operation was scaled back, then officially suspended. Miller joined the small but significant list of people who enter wilderness areas and simply vanished without explanation. I requested a transfer the following month. I couldn't stay at Blackwater. Couldn't continue to work in the shadow of what I'd experienced in the hollow. I told myself distance would help, that the memory would fade, that I could leave behind whatever waited in that tear between realities. I was wrong, because sometimes in the corner of my eye, I see them, those wrong-shaped figures from beyond the tear, watching me from just beyond the edge of perception. Sometimes in the deepest part of night, I hear whispers in a language I almost understand, speaking of hollows and tears and the thinning boundaries between worlds. And sometimes when the rain falls in that precise, deliberate way, I find myself drawn to forests near my new home, following tracks that appear and disappear, leading always deeper, always toward the places between marked trails, between known locations, toward new hollows, new tiers, new ways for them to come through. They're patient, you see. They have all the time in the world, all the worlds in their time. They wait in the spaces between trees, in the moments between heartbeats, and eventually, as Miller said, everyone find their way in. Listen to the rain. Is it random, chaotic, natural? Or can you hear the pattern in it, the code, the message? They're calling. They remember you. They've been watching. And somewhere in the woods outside your window, there's a hollow waiting just for you. The rain is particularly heavy tonight. I can hear it hammering against my cabin roof, a sound that most find comforting, a reminder of shelter, of safety. Do you feel safe listening to the rain from inside your warm home? I used to. Before that night at Mistwood National Park, I found peace in the sound of rainfall. Now it only reminds me of what I heard in those ancient woods. What I still hear if I listen carefully enough. I've been a forest ranger for nearly 18 years. The last 9 at smaller parks along the coast, where the forests are younger, brighter, more welcoming. But before that, I spent almost a decade at Mistwood, a vast wilderness of old-growth forests in the mountains, where some of the trees predate European settlement. Beautiful in its primeval way, but not a place that ever feels entirely tamed, entirely known. Most of my work at Mistwood involved the usual ranger duties: trail maintenance, visitor assistance, occasional search and rescue operations when hikers strayed off path or suffered injuries. Standard procedure for most incidents, with predictable outcomes, until the case of the Harrington twins. It began, as these things often do, with a routine missing persons report. 2 sisters, Eliza and Emma Harrington, both 27, hadn't returned from a 3-day hiking trip in the northern section of the park. Their mother called it in when they missed their scheduled check-in, explaining that her daughters were experienced hikers who visited Mistwood every autumn. They know what they're doing, she insisted over the phone, her voice tight with worry. They've been coming to these mountains since they were teenagers. Something must have happened. I took down the details. The twins had set out on Friday morning, planning to complete the Ridgeline Loop, a challenging but well-marked trail that would bring them back to their starting point by Sunday afternoon, when they hadn't called or returned by Monday morning. Their mother contacted us. Their vehicle was still in the North Ridge parking area, suggesting they hadn't simply decided to leave early. Given the twins' experience level in the deteriorating weather, a storm system was moving in, promising heavy rain by nightfall. I decided to begin searching immediately rather than waiting for morning. My colleague, Ranger Chun, volunteered to join me. We gathered our gear, notified dispatch of our plans, and headed out to the North Ridge trailhead. The Harringtons' car was indeed still in the parking area. A red Subaru Outback with hiking stickers on the bumper and 2 empty bike racks on top. Standard equipment for outdoor enthusiasts. We verified the license plate against the information we'd been given, then began our search along the Ridgeline Loop. The first leg of the trail was relatively easygoing. A gradual ascent through mixed forest, well-maintained and clearly marked. We found no sign of the missing hikers, which wasn't surprising if they'd been following their planned route. They should have completed this section on their first day. As we continued, the trail grew steeper, narrower, winding along a ridgeline that offered spectacular views of the valleys below, or would have, if not for the mist that had begun rolling in, obscuring everything beyond a few dozen yards. The first light raindrops started to fall as we reached Falcon Point, a rocky outcropping that marked the halfway point of the loop. If they were keeping the schedule, they would have camped somewhere near here on the first night, Chin said, scanning the area. Should we check the designated sites? I nodded, and we diverted to the small clearing set aside for overnight stays. No sign of recent camping. No fire ring. No disturbed ground where a tent might have stood. Just damp earth and fallen leaves, untouched. They must have moved on, I said, though something fell off. Experienced hikers usually stick to their planned routes and camping locations, especially in challenging terrain. Let's continue along the loop. The rain intensified as we pressed forward, the mist thickening around us until visibility was reduced to just a few yards in any direction. The temperature dropped, a cold wind whipping across the exposed ridgeline. Not dangerous conditions yet, but heading that way. We'd gone perhaps another mile when Chin stopped suddenly, raising a hand. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice hushed. I listened, hearing nothing but the steady patter of rain on leaves and the occasional gust of wind. Then, faintly, something else, a sound that might have been a voice, carried on the wind from somewhere ahead. "Hello," I called out, my voice seeming to be swallowed by the mist. "Park rangers. Anyone there?" The sound came again, clearer this time. Definitely a human voice, though the words were indistinct. It seemed to be coming from somewhere off-trail, down the steep eastern slope of the ridge. "Hello." I tried again, louder. "If you can hear me, call out." This time, the response was unmistakable. "Help us. We're here." A woman's voice, tight with what might have been pain or fear, or both. Without discussing it, Chin and I moved toward the sound, careful on the slippery ground, our torch beams cutting weak yellow paths through the thickening mist. The voice called again, guiding us off the marked trail and down a treacherous slope covered in loose shale and exposed tree roots. The descent was slow, each step requiring careful placement to avoid a fall. The rain was coming down heavily now, running in rivulets between rocks, making the footing even more uncertain. "Keep calling out," Chun shouted into the mist. "We're coming toward you. Here. We're down here." The voice guided us further, always seeming to come from just beyond the range of our torch beams, leading us deeper into a densely wooded valley that, according to my mental map of the park, should not have been accessible from this section of the ridge without specialized climbing equipment. After what felt like an hour of careful descent, the ground began to level out. The trees here were different, older, larger, their branches twisting together overhead to form a canopy so dense that the rain was reduced to a fine mist beneath it. The air felt different too, still heavy with a scent like wet stone and something else, something older. "Hello," I called again, sweeping my torch around the gloomy forest. "We're here," came the reply, much closer now. "We're right here." My torch beam caught movement ahead, a flash of red that resolved into a rain jacket as I focused the light. A woman stood perhaps 20 yards ahead, partially obscured by a massive tree trunk. She raised a hand to shield her eyes from the sudden brightness. "Thank God," she said, relief evident in her voice. "We thought no one would find us." Chan and I approached quickly, medical kits ready. As we drew closer, I could see the woman more clearly, slim, dark-haired, in her late 20s, one of the Harrington twins. Presumably, though in the poor light, and with her hood up, it was hard to be certain which. "Are you Eliza or Emma Harrington?" I asked as we reached her. "Are you injured? Where's your sister?" A strange expression crossed her face. something between confusion and alarm, quickly masked. "I'm Eliza," she said after a brief hesitation. "Emma's just over there, by our shelter. She twisted her ankle yesterday. We've been stuck here since." She gestured toward a crude lean-to constructed against the base of a large rock formation, little more than some branches propped together and covered with a rain fly from a tent. Beneath it, another figure sat huddled in a sleeping bag, face turned away from us. We would try to take a shortcut back to the main trail. Eliza continued, leading us toward the shelter. There was a path that looked like it would connect, but it just ended. Then Emma fell, and we couldn't get back up the slope. Our phones had no signal, and our emergency beacon wouldn't activate. It was like something was blocking it. Something about her story fell off. The twins were experienced hikers, unlikely to leave a marked trail for an unknown shortcut, especially in deteriorating weather. And this valley didn't appear on any park maps I knew. But people make mistakes, even experienced outdoors people. And our priority now was to assess injuries and plan extraction. "Emma?" I called as we approached the shelter. "I'm Ranger Taylor. How bad is your ankle?" The figure in the sleeping bag shifted slightly, but didn't turn or respond. Eliza knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "She's been in and out," she explained, her voice dropping. "The pain, you know? And she hit her head when she fell. Nothing serious, just a bump, but she's been confused." Chun was already opening her medical kit, moving to examine the injured woman. I hung back slightly, surveying our surroundings with growing unease. Something about this place felt wrong. The trees too old, too twisted. The ground too soft underfoot. The quality of silence too complete despite the rain that I could see falling through occasional gaps in the canopy. "Emma?" Chun said gently, reaching to check vital signs. "I need to look at your injury. Can you turn toward me?" Slowly, the figure in the sleeping bag turned. As her face came into the light of our torches, I felt a cold shock of recognition. This wasn't Emma Harrington. This was Eliza, identical to the woman who had introduced herself to us moments ago. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then both women smiled in perfect synchronization. The same slight curve of lips, the same head tilt, identical in every detail. "You seem confused, Ranger Taylor," they said in unison, their voices overlapping in perfect harmony. "Is something wrong?" I took an involuntary step backward, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp or cold. "Who are you?" I asked, my hand moving instinctively to the radio on my belt. Their smiles widened, still perfectly matched. "We told you," they said together. "We're Eliza and Emma Harrington." Chin had risen to her feet, backing away from the shelter, her expression a mix of confusion and growing alarm. "What's going on here?" she demanded. "One of you is Eliza, one is Emma. You're twins, not the same person." The women looked at each other, then back at us, their movements so perfectly mirrored it was like watching a reflection. "But we are the same person," said the one standing. "We've always been the same person," continued the one seated. "You just couldn't see it before." They finished together. "We're leaving," I said firmly, taking Chen's arm. "Both of you, gather your things. We need to get back to the trail before dark." Neither woman moved. "But we can't leave," said the first. "We're not finished yet," said the second. "And neither are you," they concluded in unison. That's when I noticed something I'd overlooked in the dim light. A small pile of equipment near the shelter. Among the items was a Park Service radio, identical to the ones Chun and I carried. And beside it, partially covered by a rain jacket, was a ranger's hat. My stomach twisted as I recognized the name tag. Simmons, Ranger David Simmons, who had disappeared 3 months earlier while investigating reports of unusual sounds in this very section of the park. Where did you get that radio? I asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be what I wanted to hear. He gave it to us, said the first woman. Just like you're going to give us yours, said the second. Everyone who comes here gives us something. What are you? Chen whispered, her hand now gripping my arm with bruising force. The women cocked their heads in identical gestures of consideration. We're what the forest needs, said the first. What's always needed, said the second. Voices to call the lost ones deeper. They finished together. As if on cue, a sound rose from the forest around us. A chorus of voices calling out for help. Dozens of them, male and female, young and old. Some that seemed to come from nearby. Others from impossibly far away. All calling, pleading for assistance, guiding, luring. And beneath those human voices, something else. A deeper sound, like the groaning of ancient wood or the shifting of earth far below. A patient sound. A hungry sound. Run, I said to Chun, already turning, pulling her with me. Now! We fled, abandoning all protocol, all equipment we couldn't carry in our hands. Scrambling back up the steep slope we descended so carefully. Behind us, those twin voices called out in perfect unison. You can't leave us. Please help. We're hurt. We need you. Their voices shifted as we ran, cycling through different tones, different phrasings, an archive of pleas from who knew how many lost hikers, how many rescuers who had come before us. The climb was brutal, loose shale sliding beneath our boots, exposed roots slick with rain, the gradient so steep in places we had to use hands as well as feet. The twins' voices pursued us, sometimes seeming to come from directly behind, sometimes from up ahead, sometimes from either side, always calling, always pleading, and with each passing minute, Chen's voice began to overlap with them. I noticed at first when she called out a warning about loose rocks above us. Her words were clear, direct, but they echoed strangely, as if someone else were speaking simultaneously. The voices not quite aligned. Then again, when she pointed out a more stable route up a particularly treacherous section, her voice and not her voice, like a recording slightly out of sync with itself. I said nothing, just urged us on faster, driven by a terror I couldn't fully articulate. Whatever was happening in that valley, whatever had taken Harrington twins and made them into whatever they now were, it was happening to Chin too, changing her, duplicating her, making her into another voice to call from the mist. We reached the ridgeline as darkness was falling in earnest, the rain now coming down in sheets, the wind howling across the exposed trail. I grabbed Chen's arm, forcing her to look at me in the beam of my torch. Her face was her own, but her eyes held something else now. A doubling, as if another set of eyes were looking out from behind her own. We have to go back, she said, her voice overlapping with itself. They need our help. We can't leave them. That's not you talking, I said, maintaining my grip despite her attempt to pull away. Whatever's down there, it's gotten into you somehow. We need to get back to the station, get you help. No one can help, she said, her voice now perfectly doubled. Two Chen speaking in unison from the same mouth. No one ever leaves. Not really. Parts of us always stay behind. Parts of us are always calling. She jerked free of my grip with surprising strength and turned back toward the slope we just climbed, toward the valley where those things that had once been the Harrington twins waited. I did the only thing I could think of I tackled her, bringing us both down hard on the muddy trail. We struggled briefly, but my greater weight and strength prevailed. Using the emergency restraint from my belt, I secured her wrists, ignoring her protests, which now alternated between her normal voice and that disturbing doubled speech. Somehow, through a combination of half dragging, half supporting, I got us both back to the trailhead and our vehicle, which alternated between periods of eerie calm, where both her voices spoke in perfect unison, and frantic struggles to return to the valley, where only her normal voice begged me to let her go. I radioed ahead, reporting a ranger down, possible hallucinogenic exposure, requesting medical support on arrival. I said nothing about doubles, about voices in the mist, about things that wore human faces but weren't quite human anymore. The official report states that rangers can experience a severe reaction to toxic fungi, likely inhaled as spores during the search operation, after 3 days of intense hallucinations and disorientation. She recovered fully, with no memory of what happened after we began our descent from the ridge. The report makes no mention of the fact that sometimes, when she doesn't know I'm watching, I catch her staring into the distance, lips moving in silent conversation with someone who isn't there. No mention of the fact that sometimes, in the early hours before dawn, I've heard her voice calling from 2 places at once, from her quarters at the ranger station and from the deep woods beyond. The Harrington twins remain officially missing. No further searches were authorized for the unmarked valley, which, according to senior park management, does not exist on any topographical survey of the area. Ranger Simmons remains missing as well, his disappearance attributed to a flash flood that left no trace of his body. I requested a transfer the following month. I couldn't stay at Mistwood, couldn't continue to work alongside Chun, knowing what I knew, seeing what I saw in her eyes. But distance hasn't helped, because sometimes on nights when the rain falls heavily and mist rises from ground, I hear them, voices calling from the woods behind my new home, from forests I've never entered, voices pleading for help, guiding, luring, and among them now, a voice I recognize too well. Chen's voice, doubled, perfectly synchronized with itself. Please help us. We're lost. We need you. The worst part? Sometimes I find myself answering. Not aloud, not yet, but in my mind. I hear my own voice doubling, harmonizing, preparing to join the chorus that calls from a mist. It's only a matter of time, I think, for all of us, because we're all lost in some way, all looking for something, all vulnerable to voices that promise to guide us home. Listen carefully to the rain tonight. Listen to what calls beneath its steady drumming. Can you hear it? Your own voice calling back to you from the darkness, waiting for you to answer, waiting for you to follow, waiting to welcome you. The rain sounds different tonight, heavier, more purposeful somehow, as if each drop were deliberately placed. Have you ever noticed how rain creates its own kind of silence? It drowns out the small sounds, the creaking of a house settling, the rustle of wind through leaves, the distant call of night birds. It isolates you in a cocoon of white noise that can feel either comforting or eerily isolating. Tonight, it feels like the latter, like the rain is a curtain drawing close around my cabin, separating me from the world, or perhaps separating the world from what waits in these woods. I've been a forest ranger at Greenvale National Park for just over 13 years now. It's old growth forest, mostly ancient pines and oaks that were saplings when Europeans first arrived on these shores. Beautiful country, if you respect it. Deadly if you don't. Most of my work involved the usual ranger duties, trail maintenance, visitor assistance, occasional rescue operations. But there's another part of the job they don't put in the brochures. Sometimes people go missing in these woods. And sometimes what we find, if we find anything at all, doesn't make sense. The incident I'm about to relate occurred during my 7th year at Greenvale, late autumn, after the tourist season had wound down, when the park was at its most quiet, its most remote. The rain had been falling steadily for almost a week, turning trails to mud and creeks to rushing torrents. It started with a fairly routine missing persons report. A local man, William Carter, 43, hadn't returned for what was supposed to be a day-long mushroom foraging expedition. His wife reported him missing when he hadn't called or come home by nightfall. He knows these woods, she told me. Her voice steady despite the obvious worry. He's been foraging here for years. But he always checks in, always lets me know if he's running late. This isn't like him. I took down the details. Carter's description, what he'd been wearing, where he'd planned to search for mushrooms. Fairly standard procedure. In most cases, the missing person turns up within 24 hours, either finding their own way out or being located by our search teams. But something about this case felt different from the beginning. Maybe it was a specific area Carter had been heading to, a section of the park known locally as the Old Grove. It's one of the oldest parts of the forest, with trees dating back centuries. Always darker there, always quieter, as if the ancient trees absorb sound rather than allowing to echo. Rangers tend to avoid the Old Grove when possible, not for any official reason. There's no greater physical danger there than elsewhere in the park. But there's something about the place that sets your nerves on edge. A weight to the silence. A sense of being watched by something much older, much more patient than yourself. Or maybe what bothered me was the way Carter's wife kept returning to one detail. He's been hearing things out there, she said, almost reluctantly, in the past few months. Said the trees were talking to him, not in any language he knew, but he still somehow understood. She laughed nervously after saying this, quick to add that her husband wasn't crazy or anything, just tired, perhaps working too hard, spending too much time alone in the woods. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. It wasn't the first time I'd heard similar accounts from regular visitors to the Old Grove. The stories were always similar. Whispers that weren't quite words, meanings that were understood without language, a sense of time behaving differently among those ancient trees. Most rangers chalked it up to the natural all such old-growth forests inspire. The human mind, confronted with organisms that have lived for hundreds of years, tries to anthropomorphize them, to attribute consciousness or intention to what is simply the quiet endurance of ancient living things. At least, that's what we told ourselves. I organized a search team for the following morning. Standard procedure dictated waiting until daylight for safety reasons, but I promised Carter's wife I'd do a preliminary sweep of the parking areas and main trailheads at night, just to check if his vehicle was still in the park. It was, of course, a mud-spattered pickup parked at the trailhead nearest the Old Grove. I noted its presence, confirmed it was Carter's via the license plate, and returned to the ranger station to prepare for the morning search. The rain, which had lessened briefly that evening, intensified overnight. By dawn, it was coming down in sheets, reducing visibility to a few dozen yards at best. Not ideal search conditions, but we proceeded as planned. 2 teams of 3 rangers each, one led by me, the other by my colleague, Ranger Martinez. We began at Carter's vehicle, then split up to cover more ground. My team took the most direct route toward the Old Grove, where Carter had reportedly been heading. The trail was a muddy stream in places. The surrounding forest dripping in gray and persistent downpour. We call Carter's name every 50 yards or so, our voices sounding flat and directionless in the rain-soaked air. About 2 miles in, we found our first clue, a foraging basket half hidden under a fallen branch beside the trail. Inside were several mushrooms, carefully arranged, along with small field guide for identification. Carter's, almost certainly, though there was no ID or personal items to confirm it. We radioed the find to Martinez's team, then continued toward the old grove, our unease growing with each step. The forest was changing around us, the trees becoming older, larger, their canopies creating a ceiling so dense that the rain became a fine mist beneath them. The undergrowth thinned, giving way to a thick carpet of moss that seemed to glow with a faint, greenish phosphorescence even in the dim light. And it was quiet, so profoundly, unnaturally quiet. No bird song, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, not even the sound of wind through branches. Just the soft patter of rain filtered through countless leaves and our own increasingly hushed voices as we called for the missing man. We reached the heart of the old grove around midday, though it was hard to tell. The ancient canopy blocked so much light that it seemed like perpetual twilight beneath the trees. Here, the oldest trees stood, massive trunks wider than a car, branches beginning 40 or 50 feet up, creating a cathedral-like space of dappled shadow and muted green light. "Carter," I called, my voice sounding small in that vast, quiet space. "William Carter, Park Rangers." No response but the gentle patter of rain. We spread out slightly, maintaining visual contact with each other as we searched among the massive trees. The ground was spongy with centuries of accumulated needles and leaves, making it difficult to spot footprints or signs of recent passage. I was examining the base of a particularly enormous pine when I felt it, a vibration, not through the air, but through the ground beneath my feet, a rhythmic tremor, like distant machinery, or a heartbeat. I placed my palm against the trunk of the ancient pine. The vibration was stronger here, pulsing through the wood in a steady rhythm, somehow familiar, though I couldn't immediately place why. "Do you feel that?" I asked the other rangers. They looked at me blankly, then concentrated, placing their own hands on nearby trees. "There's something," one began and froze, his expression changing to one of confusion. "It feels like a pulse." The third ranger shook his head. "I don't feel anything. What are you talking about?" Before I could explain, my radio crackled to life. Martinez's voice came through, broken by static. "Found something. Eastern sector, near the lightning-struck oak. You need to see this." We made our way toward the location Martinez had described. A massive, partially dead oak that had been struck by lightning years earlier, but had continued to live. Half its branches still sprouting leaves while the others remained bare, skeletal. Martinez and his team were standing in a rough circle, looking down at something on the ground. As we approached, I could see they were visibly shaken. Martinez himself, a 20-year veteran of the Park Service, was pale, his hand unconsciously making a warding gesture I'd seen used by some of the older locals. "What did you find?" I asked, then saw for myself as I joined their circle. It was William Carter, or rather, it was his clothing, arranged in the shape of a human body, as if someone had carefully laid out his jeans, flannel shirt, and jacket on the ground in precise position of a person lying on their back. His boots were at the end of the legs, his hat where the head would be, a perfect outline of a man, but with no body inside the clothes. More disturbing still was what lay within this empty clothing. Mushrooms, dozens of them, sprouting from the ground beneath the fabric, growing through material in places. Not the edible varieties Carter had been foraging for, but something else. Pale, translucent caps with delicate gills. Unlike any species I recognized from the park's known fungi. What the hell? One of my team whispered, voicing what we were all thinking. Martinez shook his head slowly. We found it just like this. Haven't touched anything. There's no sign of the rest of him. I crouched beside the bizarre tableau, careful not to disturb anything. The mushrooms seemed to pulse faintly in rhythm with the vibration I felt earlier, as if they were connected to whatever was causing that steady tremor beneath the forest floor. Spread out, I ordered, standing again. Search the immediate area for any trace of Carter himself. Blood, disturbed ground, anything. The six of us moved outward in an expanding circle from the clothing. I'd gone perhaps 20 yards when I noticed something strange about one of the ancient trees nearby. A massive oak, its trunk at least 6 feet in diameter. There was a pattern in its bark that didn't belong. A series of marks that looked almost like I stepped closer, my torch beam illuminating the trunk. The marks were letters, crude, as if carved by a shaking hand, but legible. They speak through the roots. And below that, in smaller, more frantic carving, they remember everything. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the rain or dampness. I called the others over, and we examined the carving together. It was fresh. The exposed was still pale, not yet darkened by exposure. Made within the last day or two, almost certainly by Carter. What does it mean? Asked one of the younger rangers. His voice hushed. I had no answer. Or rather, I had an answer I didn't want to acknowledge. One that came from old stories told by the indigenous people who had lived in these forests long before the national park was established. Stories about the oldest trees being sentient, being connected, being able to communicate across vast distances through their intertwined root systems. Stories about them sometimes taking people who spent too long listening to their whispers. As if triggered by my thoughts, a new sound became audible beneath the patter of rain. A soft, rustling whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not wind through leaves. There was no wind in the dense stillness of the old grove. This was something else. Something almost like speech, but in no language I recognized. Yet, somehow I understood. We all did, judging by the widening eyes and paling faces around me. Not words, exactly, but concepts, impressions, flooding into our minds. Old, so old. Remember, everything, every footstep, every word, every drop of blood spilled. Remember, the first ones, the ones who knew us, respected us, the ones who came later, burned, cut, killed. Remember, everything, always. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, seeming to vibrate through the ground, through the trunks of the ancient trees, through our own bodies. With them came images, flashes of the forest as it had been hundreds of years ago, before European settlement, then the arrival of loggers, of fire, of destruction, centuries of watching, of waiting, of slow, patient growth, and occasionally of retribution. The listening ones, the ones who hear us, part of us now, always part of us, feeding us, teaching us with a clarity that felt like being doused in ice water. I suddenly understood the mushrooms growing through Carter's empty clothing. They weren't growing from beneath. They were all that was left of Carter himself, transformed by something ancient and patient and utterly inhuman. We need to leave, I said, my voice steadied and I felt. Now, all of us, back to the trailhead. No one argued. We moved quickly, staying close together, following our original path back toward the edge of the old grove. The whispers followed us, growing fainter as we distanced ourselves from the heart of the ancient forest, but never fully disappearing. By the time we reached the main trail, the rain had intensified again, sheeting down to the canopy, turning the path into a muddy stream. We were soaked, shivering, but driven by a primal need to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and what we found among those ancient trees. The official report states that William Carter remains missing, presumed dead from exposure or injury in a remote section of Greenvale National Park. It notes that some of his personal effects were recovered, but his body was not located despite an extensive search. It makes no mention of empty clothing arranged in a human shape. No mention of mushrooms growing where a man should have been. No mention of carvings in ancient bark or whispers that came from the earth itself. Those details exist only in the nightmares of the 6 rangers who were there that day, and in the quiet conversations we sometimes have during night shifts when no one else is listening. Martinez requested a transfer the following month. 2 others resigned from the Park Service entirely. The rest of us stayed, but none of us venture into the old grove alone anymore. None of us forage for mushrooms. And all of us have noticed the same thing, though we rarely speak of it. The trees are spreading. The old grove is expanding year by year in ways that can't be explained by natural growth patterns. Ancient trees appearing where none stood before. The whispers growing louder, reaching further. And sometimes, in the deepest part of night, when the rain falls heavily and the world is wrapped in darkness, I swear I can hear William Carter's voice among the whispers, not calling for help anymore, just telling me what he's learned, what he's become part of, inviting me to listen more closely, to really hear what the trees remember, to join them. The rain is getting heavier now, isn't it? Listen closely to its rhythm against your roof, against your windows. Is it random, chaotic, natural? Or is there a pattern to it? A message? A memory older than humanity itself? Trying to make itself understood? The trees remember everything. And they're patient. So very patient. They can wait. The rain sounds different in the deep woods. Have you ever noticed that? The way it creates a symphony of percussive notes. Sharp taps on exposed rock, hollow drumming on fallen logs, the soft patter as it filters through layers of leaves. If you listen long enough, those layers begin to sound almost like voices conversing just below the threshold of comprehension. I've been a forest ranger at Shadow Ridge National Park for 16 years. It's old growth forest, mostly ancient pines and hemlocks that were saplings when first European ships reached these shores. Beautiful country, remote and largely untouched. The kind of wilderness that reminds you how small humans really are, how recently we've arrived on this ancient landscape. Most of my work involves the usual ranger duties: trail maintenance, visitor assistance, occasional search and rescue operations when hikers stray off path or suffer injuries. Standard procedure for most incidents with predictable outcomes, but not all of them. Not the one I'm about to relate. It was late October, 7 years ago. The tourist season had wound down. The autumn rains had set in, and the park was operating with a skeleton crew until the spring thaw. I was working a 2-week rotation at the Western Outpost, one of the most isolated ranger stations in the park. 15 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by hiking trail or the occasional helicopter supply drop. The outpost itself was basic but sufficient. A small cabin with a wood stove, solar panels for minimal electricity, and a radio system for communicating with headquarters and other stations. No self-service, no internet, just a cabin, the surrounding forest, and the ever-present sound of rain during that time of year. I was 4 days into my rotation when the call came through on the emergency channel. A woman's voice, breaking with static but audible enough. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please, I need help. My husband is injured. We're lost." I grabbed the handset immediately. "This is Ranger Taylor at Western Outpost. What's your location?" "Over." Static hissed for several long seconds before her voice returned. "I don't know exactly. We were on Blackwater Trail, but James thought he saw a shortcut. We've been walking for hours. Then he fell. His leg, it's bad. There's so much blood." Concern flared through me. The Blackwater Trail was indeed in my sector, but it was nearly 10 miles from the outpost, and there were no marked shortcuts. Just unbroken wilderness that grew increasingly rugged and difficult to navigate the further you strayed from established paths. "Can you describe your surroundings?" I asked. "Any landmarks, water features, distinctive rock formations?" "Over." "Trees," she replied, a hysterical edge entering her voice. "Just trees everywhere. Wait, there's a clearing ahead. And something else. A building, I think. Old. Abandoned." That caught my attention. There were no structures in that section of the park. At least, none on any official map. The entire area had been designated wilderness when the park was established, with no permanent human habitation. "Stay where you are," I instructed. "If you found shelter, that's good. I'll come to you. Continue to broadcast on this channel every 15 minutes, so I can home in on your signal. What's your name?" "Over." "Emily," she replied. "Emily Warren. Please hurry. The sun will be setting soon, and James, I don't know how much longer he can last. He's so pale. I'm leaving now, Emily. Keep warm. Keep James still, and keep broadcasting. I'll find you. Over." I gathered my emergency gear, medical supplies, extra clothing, food, water, emergency shelter, and set out into the steady rain. The Blackwater Trail would give me a starting point, but from there, I'd need to rely on radio direction finding to locate the lost hikers. The trail was slick with mud and fallen leaves, making progress slow and treacherous. I maintained a quick but careful pace, periodically stopping to call the couple on the radio. Each time, Emily answered, her voice becoming increasingly distorted by static as I moved deeper into wilderness, but still providing enough of a signal for me to adjust my course. The rain intensified as afternoon edged toward evening, reducing visibility to just a few yards ahead. I switched on my torch, though there were still hours until true darkness. The forest around me seemed to absorb the light, the ancient trees creating a canopy so dense that permanent twilight reigned on the forest floor. After about 2 hours of hiking, I reached the point where Emily had described leaving the main trail. There were no obvious paths, no sign that anyone had passed this way recently, just unbroken forest stretching in all directions. "Emily, do you copy? I'm at the Blackwater Trail, where I believe you left it. I need you to keep broadcasting so I can find your signal." "Over." Static. Then her voice, weaker now, more broken. "Still here? James is consciousness. Hurry." I used my radio's direction finder, turning slowly until the signal strength indicator peaked. Northeast, into one of the most remote sections of the park. I marked my location with a GPS waypoint and began pushing through the undergrowth, no longer following any path, just a faint signal of a desperate woman calling for help. The going was brutal, dense vegetation, steep slopes, fallen trees creating barriers that had to be climbed over or circumvented. The rain continued its relentless patter, soaking through my waterproofs, adding weight and cold that sapped energy with each step. But I pressed on, stopping every 15 minutes to check the radio, to reassure Emily I was coming, to get another bearing on her signal. Each time, her replies grew more fragmented, more distorted by static, but still present enough to guide me deeper into the wilderness. As dusk approached, the forest began to change around me. The trees grew older, larger, their trunks twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. The undergrowth thinned, giving way to a carpet of moss that glowed with a faint phosphorescence in the fading light. And the rain sounded different here, more rhythmic, almost like words in a language just beyond comprehension. I checked my GPS and found, to my confusion, that it was no longer receiving a signal. Impossible in theory. The units we used were military grade, designed to work under dense canopy. Yet the screen showed only an error message where my coordinates should have been. My radio crackled to life without my touching it. Close now. Can see your light just ahead. I played my torch beam through the trees, scanning for any sign of human presence. And there, a faint glow through the curtain of rain and gathering darkness. Not the harsh white of a torch or lantern, but a softer, yellower illumination that suggested firelight or old electric bulbs. I pushed forward, feeling a growing sense of wrongness that I couldn't quite articulate. Something about this whole situation felt off. The lack of GPS signal, the changing character of the forest, the light that shouldn't exist in an area with no structures or power sources. And then I broke through a final screen of vegetation and found myself standing at the edge of a perfect circular clearing. At its center stood a cabin, not the modern, functional design of Park Service buildings, but something older, more primitive. A settler's cabin from another century, its logs weathered to silver gray, its windows glowing with warm yellow light. It was impossible. This area had been surveyed extensively when the park was established. There were no historical structures here, no record of settlement. Yet there it stood, as real and solid as the ground beneath my feet. Emily? I called, approaching cautiously. Emily Warren? Park Ranger. No response, but the steady drum of rain on the cabin's shake roof. I reached the porch, weatherboards creaking beneath my weight, and knocked on the door. When no answer came, I tried the handle. It turned easily, the door swinging inward on silent hinges. The interior was a single room, illuminated by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows across rough-hewn furniture. A table, chairs, a cast-iron stove in one corner, a narrow bed in another. A fire burned in the stove, warming the space to an almost uncomfortable degree after the chill outside. But no people, no Emily Warren, no injured James. The cabin was empty. "Hello?" I called, stepping inside, water puddling from my rain gear onto the plank floor. "Anyone here?" My radio burst into static, so loud it made me jump, then resolved into Emily's voice, clearer than it had been since our first contact. "You're here." Finally, I was beginning to think you wouldn't find us. The voice came not from the radio itself, but from behind me. I turned slowly, a chill running down my spine despite the warmth of the cabin. A woman stood in a doorway I hadn't noticed before, a doorway that shouldn't have existed in a one-room cabin. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair and pale skin, wearing hiking clothes that seemed oddly dated, the style at least a decade out of fashion. "Emily Warren?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She nodded, a smile spreading across her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And your Ranger Taylor. You came just like you promised." She glanced over her shoulder into the darkness beyond the doorway. "James will be so relieved. He's been waiting for you. We've all been waiting." "Where is your husband?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady, to maintain professional demeanor that had seen me through countless emergency situations. "You said he was injured. I have medical supplies." Emily's expression didn't change, That same not-quite-right smile fixed in place. He's through here. They're all through here. Everyone who's ever gotten lost in these woods. Everyone who's ever needed help. She stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter the darkness beyond the doorway. Every instinct screamed against it. Against following this strange woman into a space that couldn't possibly exist within the physical constraints of the cabin I'd seen from outside. Perhaps you could bring him out here, I suggested, setting my pack on the table, unzipping it to access my medical kit. Better light for me to assess his injuries. Emily's smile faltered slightly. He can't be moved. None of them can. You have to come through. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. How it works? I asked, a sick feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. Her head tilted, an oddly mechanical movement. The gathering, of course. The waiting. The becoming part of what's always been here. She gestured again toward the darkness. They need a ranger. They've always needed a ranger. Someone who knows the forest, who can guide them. Guide them where... My voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Home, she said simply. None of us can find our way home without a guide. Not anymore. Not since we entered these woods and became part of them. I took an involuntary step backward, my hand moving to the radio in my belt, not to use it, but for the comfort of its solid, technological presence in this increasingly surreal situation. There's been a misunderstanding, I said, struggling to keep my voice professional, authoritative. I'm here to provide medical assistance and guide you back to marked trails. If your husband is injured, I need to see him immediately. Emily's expression changed then, the artificial smile dropping away, replaced by something older, something hungry. There's no misunderstanding, Ranger Taylor. You came when called, as your kind always does. Duty, responsibility, such useful human traits, such effective lures. She took a step toward me, and in the shifting lamplight, I noticed something I had missed before. Her feet made no sound on the wooden floor, left no wet marks despite the rain outside. And beyond her, through the impossible doorway, shapes were moving in the darkness. Human-like shapes, dozens of them. Their edges blurred as if they weren't quite solid, weren't quite there. You see them now, don't you? Emily said, her voice changing, deepening, layers of other voices joining with hers in a discordant harmony. All the lost ones, all the forgotten ones, hikers, campers, rangers who came before you, parts of the forest now, parts of what's always been here, watching, waiting, calling through the rain. I backed toward the cabin door, toward the rain and darkness outside that suddenly seemed far less threatening than what stood before me. I'm leaving now, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Whatever this is, whatever you are, I'm not part of it. Emily, or the thing that had been using her voice, her image, smiled again, an expression of ancient patience. But you are part of it, Ranger Taylor. You became part of it the moment you heard my voice on your radio. The moment you left your safe outpost to follow that voice into the deep woods. The moment you cross a threshold of this place that exists between what is and what has always been. I reached behind me for the door handle, felt the solid metal beneath my fingers, began to turn it. Others have tried to leave. The thing wearing Emily's form said conversationally, they always return. The forest calls them back. The forest remembers them. You see, once you've entered this clearing, once you've stepped inside this cabin, you're part of the pattern, part of the gathering. The door opened behind me, and I stumbled backward onto the porch, into the blessed normalcy of cold rain and natural darkness. Without looking back, I plunged into surrounding forest, no longer caring about direction or navigation, driven by a primal need to put distance between myself and that impossible cabin with an impossible doorway leading to somewhere I wouldn't comprehend. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give way beneath me. Ran until the rain soaked through every layer of clothing, chilling me to the bone. Ran until I finally collapsed against the trunk of a massive pine, gasping for breath. My torch long lost in the headlong flight through undergrowth and darkness. When I finally gathered enough composure to check my radio, to attempt to call for assistance, I found it dead, not just without signal, but completely lifeless, as if its battery and circuitry had been drained of all energy. My GPS remained similarly unresponsive, the screen dark and cold. I was alone in the wilderness, in darkness and pouring rain, with no means of communication and no way to navigate, except I wasn't alone. Even through the steady drumming of rain, I could hear them, voices, dozens of them, calling from the darkness between the trees, calling my name, pleading for help, for guidance, for rescue. Emily's voice among them, but others too. Men, women, children, all lost, all waiting, all calling me back to the cabin in the clearing. I don't remember much of what followed. Fragments only, stumbling through the night forest. The voices always just behind me, just ahead of me, always surrounding me. The rain continuing its relentless fall, occasionally forming patterns in the air before me. Shapes that almost resemble human figures, reaching out with limbs made of water and mist before dissolving again. Somehow, as dawn broke, a gray, grudging light filtered through still falling rain. I found myself back on a marked trail, not the Blackwater, where I begun my journey, but the ridgeline path, nearly 5 miles away on the opposite side of my sector. I followed it in a daze, every step an effort of will, the voices gradually fading as I approached more traveled areas of park. I reached the eastern outpost just after noon, collapsing onto the porch where another ranger found me, hypothermic, dehydrated, babbling about cabins that couldn't exist and voices calling through the rain. The official report states that I experienced severe disorientation after becoming lost while investigating a potential distress call that turned out to be radio interference. It notes that auditory hallucinations are not uncommon in cases of hypothermia and exhaustion, particularly in wilderness settings where isolation and natural sounds can play tricks on the mind. It makes no mention of an impossible cabin in a perfect circular clearing. No mention of a doorway leading to darkness where shapes moved with almost human form. No mention of a voice on the radio that lured me deep into the wilderness for purposes I still don't fully comprehend. I requested a transfer the following month. I couldn't stay at Shadow Ridge. Couldn't continue to work in a place where I knew such things existed beyond the boundaries of marked trails and official maps. I chose a coastal park, thinking perhaps the open vistas of shoreline and sea would provide some psychological barrier against the claustrophobic memories of ancient trees and whispering rain. It helped for a time. The voice on the radio fell silent. The dreams of the cabin and its impossible doorway grew less frequent. I began to convince myself that perhaps the official report was right, that I had indeed experienced nothing more than convergence of a strange radio anomaly and the physiological effects of hypothermia. Until 3 nights ago, when the autumn rains returned, drumming against the roof of my new cabin with the same rhythmic pattern I remembered from 7 years ago. And with the rain came the voices, distant at first, barely audible beneath the steady patter on my roof, but growing clearer with each passing hour, calling my name, reminding me of my duty, of my responsibility to guide the lost ones home. My radio sits on the table before me as I write this, silent for now, but I know it won't remain so. Soon it will crackle to life with a woman's voice breaking through static. Hello? Is anyone there? Please, I need help. My husband is injured. We're lost. And despite what I know, despite the terror still fresh in my memory after 7 years, I will answer. I will gather my gear and set out into the rain, because that's what rangers do. We respond when called. We help those in need. Even knowing it's a lure, a trap, I will follow that voice into the deep woods again. Because now I understand what Emily, or the thing that used her voice, her image, meant. Once you've entered that clearing, once you've stepped inside that cabin, you're part of the pattern, part of the gathering. The forest remembers you. The forest calls you back. The rain is falling harder now. Listen, can you hear the layers in it? The almost words forming in the spaces between droplets? They're calling for someone to guide them home. And this time, I think I know the way. The rain sounds different tonight. Heavier, more insistent, like countless fingers tapping at my cabin roof, trying to find a way in. Have you ever truly listened to rain in the deep forest? Not just heard it, but listen to the layers it creates. The patter on high leaves, the drumming on fallen logs, the gentle hiss as it finally reaches the forest floor. It forms a kind of music if you pay attention, a language if you listen long enough. I've been a forest ranger at Pine Home National Park for 17 years. It's old growth forest, mostly ancient pines and hemlocks that were standing when the first European ships reached these shores. Beautiful country, remote and largely untouched. The kind of wilderness that feels primeval, that reminds you how briefly humans have existed compared to the trees that silently watch our passing. Most of my work involves rather routine duties. Trail maintenance, visitor assistance, occasional search and rescue when hikers stray off marked paths. But sometimes, the forest presents mysteries that defy standard operating procedures. Incidents that never quite make it into official reports, at least not in their entirety. The kind that keep you awake on nights like this, when the rain whispers against your window and memories you try to bury resurface like driftwood after storm. This is one of those incidents. The strangest missing persons case I've ever encountered, and its aftermath, which I've never shared with anyone until now. It began 5 years ago, during the autumn rainy season. I was working the evening shift at the main ranger station when a call came in, a young woman reporting that her sister, Emma Sinclair, hadn't returned from a day hike along the Bitterroot Trail. She was only supposed to be gone for a few hours, the woman explained, her voice tight with worry. She knows these trails. She hikes them all the time. She wouldn't just not come back. I took down the details. Emma Sinclair, 28, experienced hiker, had sat alone that morning with a day pack, water, emergency supplies, and her dog, a border collie named Scout. She'd told her sister she'd be back by mid-afternoon. It was now approaching 9 p.m., fully dark, with steady rain that had been falling since dusk. I'll drive out to the Bitterroot Trailhead and check if her car is still there, I told the sister. If it is, we'll organize a search team for First Light tomorrow. Please, the sister said, her voice cracking slightly. Emma wouldn't leave Scout out there overnight in the rain. Something's wrong. I can feel it. The mention of the dog elevated my concern. Hikers sometimes lose track of time or decide to extend their journey. But someone who brought their dog would be unlikely to stay out after dark in poor weather. Dogs can panic in unfamiliar environments, especially when visibility and scent tracking are compromised by rain and darkness. I drove to the Bitterroot Trailhead as the rain intensified, drumming against my vehicle's roof, casting shifting shadows in my headlights. Emma's car was indeed still in the small gravel parking area, a blue Subaru with hiking stickers on the bumper. I checked inside with my torch. A jacket lay on the passenger seat alongside a half-empty water bottle. Nothing to indicate distress or hasty departure. Just the normal belongings of someone planning to return after a brief hike. Protocol dictated waiting until morning to begin a full search, especially given the deteriorating weather conditions. But something about this case, the presence of the dog, the sister's certainty that something was wrong, prompted me to do a preliminary sweep of the immediate trail area. If Emma had been injured close to the trailhead, she might be within earshot. I pulled on my rain gear, checked my torch, and set out along the Bitterroot Trail. Calling Emma's name every 100 yards or so, the forest swallowed my voice, the rain muffling sound, creating a cocoon of white noise that isolated me in a bubble of weak torchlight and cascading water. The Bitterroot Trail is relatively easy for the first mile, following a creek before beginning a moderate climb up a forested ridge. I'd covered about half that distance when I heard it, a bark, distant but distinct, cutting through the steady drum of rain. "Scout," I called, directing my voice toward the sound. "Scout." Another bark, then another, a rapid series that suggested excitement or distress. I left the trail, following the sound through dense undergrowth, my torch beam bouncing wildly as I pushed through rain-soaked ferns and salal bushes. I found the dog in a small clearing about 50 yards from the main trail. A border collie, soaking wet, agitated but uninjured. No sign of Emma. "Hey there," I said softly, approaching with hand extended. "Scout, where's your person, buddy?" The dog whined, circling me anxiously, then darted a few yards away before looking back. Clearly wanted me to follow. Classic rescue dog behavior. I'd seen it before in trained search and rescue animals. But Scout, as far as I knew, had no such training. Still, I followed as the dog led me deeper into the forest, away from the Bitterroot Trail, into an area with no marked paths. The going was difficult. Slippery ground, dense vegetation. The rain now coming down in sheets that limited visibility to just a few feet beyond my torch beam. After about 10 minutes of this challenging progress, Scout stopped at the edge of another clearing, large in the first, perfectly circular in a way that seemed almost deliberate. The dog whined, pressing against my legs, suddenly reluctant to proceed further. "Emma?" I called, playing my torch beam across the open space. "Emma Sinclair?" Park Ranger. No human response came, but my light caught something at the center of the clearing, a small stone structure about waist high, roughly cylindrical. It resembled a well, though no such feature appeared on any park map I knew, and the area had no history of settlement that would explain its presence. I approached cautiously, the dog following with obvious reluctance. The structure was indeed like a traditional stone well, a circular wall of fitted rocks without mortar, open at the top. My torch beam revealed no water within, just a shaft descending into darkness beyond the reach of my light. "Emma?" I called again, leaning slightly over the edge, my voice echoing back from below. "Can you hear me?" A sound emerged from the depths, not a human voice, not the echo of my own call, but something else, a rhythmic tapping, like stone striking stone, forming a pattern that seemed almost like language. Tap, 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 pause, tap, pause, tap, tap. As I listened, tried to discern meaning in the pattern, I noticed something unusual about the rain in the clearing. While it continued to fall heavily in the surrounding forest within the perfect circle of open ground, it had lessened to a gentle mist that seemed to hang suspended in the air rather than falling naturally to earth. Scout whined again, tugging at my pant leg, as if trying to pull me away from a well. I reached down to reassure the dog, and noticed something caught in its collar, a small piece of fabric. I carefully removed it, holding in my torch beam for a better look. It was a torn piece of flannel shirt, blue and green plaid, with a small embroidered pine tree on one corner. The same emblem was on several of the hiking stickers on Emma's car. This was a piece of her clothing, almost certainly. I leaned further over the well, playing my torch deep into its depths. "Emma Sinclair, can you hear me?" The tapping stopped abruptly. For several long seconds, there was complete silence, broken only by the distant sound of rain falling in the forest beyond the clearing. Then, from deep within the well shaft, came a voice, faint, distorted, but recognizably human. "Hello? Who's there? Please, help me." A woman's voice. Young. Frightened. Emma Sinclair, it had to be. "This is Park Ranger Taylor." I called down. "I'm here to help you, Emma. Are you injured?" A pause, and I don't think so. "I don't know. It's so dark down here. I can't see anything." "How did you get down there?" I asked, trying to assess the situation before attempting any rescue. The shaft appeared too narrow for someone to have fallen in accidentally. They would have had to deliberately enter it. Another pause, longer this time. "I don't remember. I was hiking with Scout, and then I heard something coming from here, calling me, and now I'm here and I can't find a way out." Her voice didn't sound right. There was a flat quality to it, an absence of the echo I would expect from someone speaking up from the bottom of a stone shaft. And her words, while expressing confusion and fear, lacked the emotional inflection that should accompany such feelings. "Is there water where you are?" I asked. "What can you see or feel around you?" "No water," she replied. "Just stone, cold stone, and darkness. So much darkness." A brief pause, and in a tone somehow both flat and urgent. "You need to come down. There's something you need to see down here. Something important." Warning bells rang in my mind. No injured hiker would ask a rescuer to join them in a dangerous situation. They would want to be extricated, brought to safety. "I'm going to lower a rope," I said, "unsling my pack to access my emergency gear. I need you to secure it around yourself so I can pull you up." "No," the voice said quickly. "That won't work. The shaft, it changes direction, widens. You need to come down. It's the only way." Scout was growling now, a low, continuous sound I'd never heard from a border collie before. They typically whine or bark when distressed. This was different, primordial, a warning. I stood, taking a step back from the well. "Emma, I'm going to get additional help. I'll be back with a technical rescue team." "No." The voice changed, deepened, took on harmonics that no human throat could produce. "You will come down now. Someone must take her place." I stumbled backward, nearly falling as Scout's growls intensified. From the well came a sound like rushing wind, like countless whispers speaking together in a language I couldn't understand, but somehow recognized on a level below conscious thought. And with it, rising from the darkness, came something else, a hand gripping the stone edge of the well, a human hand, or something that resembled one, with fingers too long, too pale, joints that bend in ways human anatomy shouldn't permit. I ran. Self-preservation overcame training, duty, every protocol drilled into me through years of service. I ran blindly into the rain-soaked forest. Scout at my heels, the whispers from the well pursuing us like wind through the trees. I don't remember much of the journey back to the trail. Fragments only, crashing through underbrush, slipping on rain-slick ground, branches whipping against my face. The dog somehow guiding me, leading me back to marked paths in relative safety. When I finally reached the trailhead of my vehicle, dawn was breaking, a gray, reluctant light filtering through the still falling rain. I sat in the driver's seat, shaking, trying to process what I'd experienced, what I'd fled from. Scout huddled in the passenger seat, no longer growling but still tense, watchful. I radioed for backup, reporting a potential fall injury in an unmarked area off the Bitterroot Trail. I didn't mention the well, didn't describe the hand that had reached from its depths or the voice that had changed from human to something else. Who would believe me? The search team assembled within the hour. 6 rangers, including myself, two with technical rescue training for confined space extraction. I led them back along the Bitterroot Trail, then into the forest where Scout had first found me. The dog refused to come, remaining in my vehicle despite my attempts to bring him along to help retrace our path. We searched for 3 days, every inch of forest within a 2-mile radius of where I found Scout, every ravine, every rocky outcrop where someone might have fallen, every abandoned mining test pit from the brief gold rush that had swept the area a century earlier. We found nothing. No circular clearing. No trace of Emma Sinclair. The official report states that Emma remains missing, fate unknown. It speculates that she may have fallen into one of the numerous unmarked prospect pits that miners had dug throughout the region during the 1890s, many of which have been obscured by a century of forest growth. It says nothing about a voice from darkness that changed from human to inhuman. Nothing about a hand with too many joints reaching up from below. Nothing about the perfect circular clearing, where rain fell differently than in the surrounding forest. Those details exist only in my memory, and in the nightmares that wake me on rainy nights like this one. Emma's sister adopted Scout, who never showed any interest in returning to the forest. The dog would grow agitated whenever they approached the park boundaries, barking and straining against his leash until they turned back, a common trauma response in animals who experience something frightening, the veterinarian explained. I requested a transfer to the visitor center 6 months later, taking a position that kept me away from the deep forest, especially that section near the Bitterroot Trail. I told myself it was to pursue educational opportunities, a chance to share my knowledge of the park with visitors rather than patrol its wild places. The truth was simpler, more primal. I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd encountered in that circular clearing. Afraid of what might be waiting if I ever strayed too far from marked trails again. For 5 years, I've maintained this careful distance. 5 years of working within sight of buildings, of roads, of other people. 5 years of telling myself that what happened that rainy night was some combination of stress, poor visibility, and overactive imagination influenced by local folklore about the old mining operations. Until 3 weeks ago, I was locking up the visitor center after an evening presentation when I noticed her, a woman standing at the edge of the parking lot, partially illuminated by the security lights. Dark hair, rain jacket, hiking boots. For a moment, I thought it was just a late visitor waiting for a ride. Then she turned and I saw her face. Emma Sinclair, exactly as she appeared in the photos her sister had shown me 5 years earlier. Hunaged, unchanged, watching me with an expression I couldn't read from that distance. I called out, started toward her. She smiled, a movement of facial muscles that didn't reach her eyes, then turned and walked in the forest that bordered the parking lot. By the time I reached the tree line, she was gone. No footprints in the soft earth. No sound of movement through undergrowth. Just the steady patter of beginning rain. She's appeared twice more since then. Always at dusk. Always at the edge of forest and civilization. Always watching me with that same empty smile before disappearing when I try to approach. And now, people have begun to go missing again. 3 hikers in the past month. All from different areas of the park. All experienced outdoors people who shouldn't have become lost on well-marked trails. Rangers have searched. Search and rescue teams with dogs have searched. No trace has been found. No abandoned equipment. No signs of struggle or injury. As if the hikers simply stepped off the trail and out of existence. I haven't told anyone about seeing Emma. Haven't shared my suspicion that her appearances and the disappearances are connected. Who would believe me? What evidence do I have beyond a 5-year-old encounter that I've never fully documented, never officially reported? But I know what's happening. Someone must take her place. That's what the voice from the well said. For 5 years, Emma Sinclair has been wherever the well leads, held there, trapped there, and now something has allowed her to return, but only if others take her place. 3 others so far, and she's trying to tell me, showing herself to me specifically, the ranger who found the well, who heard the voice, who ran from whatever was climbing out of the depths. Last night, she appeared at my bedroom window, her face pressed against the glass, distorted by the rain running down the pane. When I approached, she didn't disappear as before. She raised her hand, too pale, fingers too long, joints bending in ways they shouldn't, and wrote in the condensation on the glass. One word, reversed from my perspective on the inside, but still legible. Trade. I understood immediately. Horrible as it is, I understood. She's offered me a bargain. The 3 missing hikers for what? Something I can give. Something only I can provide. The answer came to me as I stood there, watching rain wash away her message, watching her fade into the darkness beyond my window. The well requires balance. 3 people have gone missing, taken to replace Emma. But if she returns permanently, a 4th must take her place. The worst part is, I'm considering it. Not because I'm brave or noble, but because I can't live with this knowledge, with these appearances, with the certainty that more people will disappear. People I'm sworn to protect. To keep safe in this wilderness I've dedicated my life to serving. And because I'm afraid of what Emma might become if she remains trapped between worlds for too long. What the hand reaching from the well might do if it ever fully emerges. Tonight, as the rain drums against my roof with that same rhythm I heard tapping up from the well depths, I've made my decision. I packed a small bag, torch, rope, water, basic supplies for a journey I don't expect to return from. Scout died last month. Old age, Emma's sister said when she called to tell me. The dog that found me in the forest, that led me to the well and then away from it, is gone. Perhaps that's significant. Perhaps Scout was somehow preventing what's happening now. A guardian at the threshold between worlds. I'm leaving this account behind, so there will be some record, some explanation for what I'm about to do. So whoever finds it will know that I went willingly, with full understanding of the choice I was making. I'm going back to the Bitterroot Trail tonight, back into the deep forest, in darkness and rain. I know Emma will appear to guide me to the well again, to the place where rules of nature and physics bend, where what waits below needs to maintain its terrible balance. 1 for 1, a trade, a ranger who ran when duty called, finally answering that call 5 years too late. The rain is growing heavier. Listen to it, the rhythm in it, the almost language it forms when filtered through layers of ancient forest. It's calling, telling me it's time. If you're reading this, and someone emerges from the forest who looks like me, speaks like me, but somehow isn't quite right, don't trust them. Don't follow them, especially not on rainy nights when the boundary between worlds grows thin, because the price of return is high, and someone must always take their place. The rain sounds different up here on Blackwood Mountain. Have you noticed that? The way it strikes the cabin roof with a precision that almost suggests consciousness. Not the chaotic patter of ordinary rainfall, but something deliberate, measured, like fingers tapping out a code. I've been a forest ranger at Evergreen National Park for just over 11 years now. Most of that time spent at the main station in the valley. But the past 2 seasons I've been assigned to Blackwood Mountain Outpost, one of the most remote ranger stations in the park system, perched on the mountain's eastern slope at just over 7,000 feet. It's a solitary cabin accessible only by a rugged service road that becomes impassable during the winter months. From November to March, whoever's stationed here is effectively isolated. Radio contact with the main station is spotty at best, non-existent during storms. No cell service, no internet, just a cabin, the surrounding wilderness, and the constant presence of the mountain looming above. Most rangers request valley assignments during winter. I've always preferred the mountain. There's a clarity to the isolation, a purpose to the solitude, or at least there was until last season. Until the incident I've never formally reported. The one I'm finally put into words now. As rain drums against my cabin roof with that same measured rhythm I heard that night. The night everything changed. It was late October, just over a year ago. The final supply run before winter had come and gone, leaving me well-stocked with 5 months of isolation ahead. The first major storm of the season was moving in. Not snow yet, but the kind of driving, relentless rain that precedes winter at this elevation. I'd spent the day securing the outpost, checking the generator, ensuring the firewood was properly stored, running through my mental checklist of preparations developed over years of winter assignments. By evening, as the storm intensified, I'd settled into the comfortable routine that would carry me through the dark months. Radio check with the main station, dinner, review of the day's wildlife observations, then a few hours of reading before sleep. The radio crackle was static as I made my evening check-in. The storm already interfering with transmission. Blackwood Outpost to main station, evening check-in, weather deteriorating. Expecting significant rainfall overnight. All systems normal. Over. Through bursts of static, the main station responded, copy that, Blackwood. We're same storm system here. Expect contact morning. Copy, I replied. We'll check in at 0800 tomorrow. Blackwood Outpost out. I turned the radio to standby and prepared a simple dinner, listening to the rain intensify from a steady patter to a pounding drumbeat against the cabin roof. The wind picked up too, moaning around the eaves, occasionally gusting with enough force to make the windows rattle in their frames. It was perhaps 2 hours later, as I sat reading by the fire, that I first heard it, a sound distinct from the storm, from the rain and wind and creaking timber the cabin settling, a knocking, 3 sharp raps on the cabin door, as clear and deliberate as if someone were standing on the porch outside, which was impossible. The service road would be a mudslip by now, impassable even for the specialized vehicles used by park staff. No hiker could have reached this elevation in such conditions, and any ranger or park employee would have radioed ahead. Would have been expected. Hello, I called, marking my place in the book. Who's there? No answer came, but another series of knocks. 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced, deliberate. I stood, crossed the door, and peered through the small window set into its upper half. Darkness greeted me, the porch illuminated only by what little light spilled through the cabin windows. No human figure stood outside. No vehicle waited in the clearing beyond. The knocking came again from directly below the window. 3 raps, somehow audible despite the roar of the storm. Identify yourself. I called more forcefully this time. This is a Park Service facility. Again, no verbal response. Just silence broken by the wind and rain. I considered my options. Protocol for an unknown visitor in such remote locations was clear. Maintain barriers until identity could be established. For all I knew, it could be a lost hiker, confused and desperate for shelter. But no hiker could have reached this location in the current conditions. Decision made, I retrieved my sidearm from the locked cabinet. Standard issue for rangers in remote outposts where wildlife encounters were a legitimate concern. I kept it pointed at the floor as I approached the door again. I'm armed. I announced clearly, identify yourself or leave the area immediately. The response this time was not a knock, but a voice, faint but audible beneath the storm. A human voice, or at least something that approximated one. Please, it said. The words stretched and distorted as if the speaker was struggling with the concept of language. Cold. Lost. Help. Every instinct warned against opening that door. Yet my duty as a ranger, my responsibility to those who might be in danger in the wilderness I was sworn to protect, pushed against those instincts. Who are you? I asked. How did you reach this location? Walking. Came the reply, clearer now, a woman's voice, I thought, though it was difficult to be certain. So long walking. Please, open. I made a compromise with protocol and personal caution. I unlatched the door, but kept the security chain engaged, opening it just enough to see out onto the porch while maintaining a barrier. No one stood immediately outside. The porch appeared empty, rain slanting in to wet the wooden boards under pressure of wind. Hello, I called through the gap. Where are you? Movement caught my eye, not on the porch, but beyond it, at the edge of the clearing where the cabin's light gave way to absolute darkness. A figure, indistinct in the rain and gloom, standing just at the transition between light and shadow. Human-shaped, I thought, though the proportions seemed off somehow. Too tall, perhaps, or too thin. It was difficult to be certain at that distance, through rain falling in sheets across my line of sight. Can you come closer? I called. I can't see you clearly. The figure moved forward, a strangely fluid motion that covered more ground than seemed right for the number of steps taken. As it approached, details began to resolve. A woman I saw now, though something about her appearance struck me as wrong in ways I couldn't immediately articulate. Her clothes hung in tatters, soaked through, plastered against a frame that seemed too angular, too sharp at joints and edges. Her hair, long and dark, clung to her skull and shoulders in wet ropes. Her face remained in shadow, angled downward as she moved across the clearing toward the cabin. Stop there, I ordered when she reached the bottom of the porch steps. That's close enough until you identify yourself. She stopped with unnatural precision, one foot partially raised to take the first step, suspended there as if frozen mid-motion. Name, she said. The word formed as a question, as if the concept was foreign. No name now. Lost it. Lost everything. Walking so long. Where did you come from? I asked, the sense of wrongness intensifying as I studied her unnaturally still form. No shivering despite the cold rain. No shifting of weight or the small movements all humans make even when trying to stand still. Just that perfect, frozen pose, 1 foot raised a step. The other side, she replied, her voice clearer now, though still carrying an accent or impediment I couldn't place. Across the mountain, through the thin place, where walls break. A hiker from the western slope, perhaps? There were trails there, though none that connected directly to the side of the mountain, and none that anyone could navigate in current conditions. Are you injured? I asked. Do you need medical attention? Slowly, with a deliberate motion that reminded me of time-lapse footage of plants growing, she raised her head to fully face me. I recoiled involuntarily, the security chain rattling as I jolted backward. Her face, what should have been her face, was wrong in a way that defied immediate comprehension. Features present but arranged incorrectly, as if someone had described a human face to an artist who had never actually seen one. Eyes too large, too widely spaced. Mouth a simple horizontal line. Lips absent. Nose barely suggested by 2 vertical slits. And her skin, it had a quality I can only describe as unfinished, like clay that had been shaped but not fired, still carrying the impressions of whatever tools had formed it. Help, she said again, and I saw now that her mouth didn't move in sync with the word. Opened slightly before the sound emerged, closed after it faded. Cold, lost, let me in. I slammed the door, engaging all 3 locks with shaking hands. My heart hammered against my ribs, breath coming in short, sharp gasps. What I had seen wasn't possible. It wasn't compatible with reality, as I understood it. Through the door came her voice again, no longer faint, no longer distorted, but clear and perfect. as if she stood directly on the other side of the thin wooden barrier. "Ranger Parker, please open the door. I need your help." My name. She knew my name, though I hadn't introduced myself. Though my name badge was inside the cabin, not visible through the narrow opening I'd maintained. "Go away," I said, voice steady than I felt. "Leave now or I'll radio for assistance." A sound came then from directly outside the door. Not speech, not laughter, though it contained elements of both. A rhythmic clicking, rising and falling in pitch, like some insect language rendered at human scale. Then silence, broken only by the storm. I stood frozen, listening for any sound of movement on the porch, any indication of whether the visitor might have gone. After several long minutes of nothing but rain and wind, I risked looking through the window again. The porch was empty. The clearing beyond, as far as I could see in the limited light, deserted. I spent the remainder of that night in a state of hypervigilance, checking and rechecking the locks, scanning the darkness beyond the windows, straining to hear any sound that didn't belong to the storm. My sidearm remained within reach, though I harbored no illusion it would be effective against whatever had stood on my porch, had worn that approximation of a human face. Despite my certainty that sleep would be impossible, exhaustion eventually claimed me somewhere in the pre-dawn hours. I woke with a start of gray daylight filtering through the windows, the storm reduced to a gentle patter against the roof. The events of the night took on a dreamlike quality in the light of day. Had I experienced some hallucination brought on by isolation and the onset of winter confinement? Some waking nightmare born of anxiety about the months of solitude ahead? I performed my standard morning checks. Generator running smoothly, water system functioning, supplies intact. Normalcy is ballast against a memory of that unfinished face. Those words spoken without proper motion of mouth and lips. At 0800, I made my scheduled radio check with the main station. Through static and interference, I received confirmation that the storm had passed through the valley as well, causing minor flooding but no significant damage. I said nothing about my night visitor, about the woman who wasn't a woman standing at the edge of the clearing. Who would believe me? What would I even report? That I had been visited by something wearing an unconvincing human disguise? That I'd violated protocol by attempting to engage with an unidentified visitor while isolated on a mountain outpost? Better to say nothing. To convince myself it had been some stress-induced hallucination, some waking dream in the liminal space between evening and true sleep. That rationalization sustained me through the morning as I performed routine tasks, checking perimeter of the outpost, assessing storm damage to the weather monitoring equipment, recording wildlife signs, until I saw the footprints. They led from the edge of the clearing, exactly where I first spotted the figure, to the porch steps. Not human footprints, though they held the suggestion of a humanoid foot. Too narrow, too deeply pressed into the mud, as if whatever had made them carried more weight than its frame suggested. And the stride length, impossibly long, covering ground in single steps that would require a jump from any human. I followed them as they circled the cabin, keeping a precise 3 feet from the structure at all times, completing a full circuit before returning to the porch steps. From there, they continued back across the clearing, disappearing into the tree line exactly where they had originated. Something had been here, had circled my cabin while I slept, maintaining a precise distance before departing the way it had come. Shaken, I retreated to the cabin, switching the radio from standby to active monitoring, hoping to hear voices from the main station, any human contact to anchor me against the growing certainty that what I'd encountered hadn't been a hallucination. For hours, nothing came through but static, the storm's aftermath still interfering with signal transmission. As dusk approached, I faced the prospect of another night alone with the knowledge that something had found me here, had known my name, had circled my shelter with methodical precision while I slept. The knock came just after sunset. 3 sharp raps, identical to the previous night. Same rhythm, same intensity. I didn't respond, didn't call out or approach the door. Just sat in silence. The fire banked low, lights dimmed, as if I could pretend the cabin was empty, abandoned. 3 more knocks, then the voice, clearer now, perfectly modulated, a suggestion of an accent entirely gone. Ranger Parker, I know you're inside. I know you're alone here. I know you've been watching the mountain, just as we've been watching you. A chill ran through me at those words. There were more of them. Whatever they were, what do you want? I called, unable to help myself. Understanding. Came the immediate reply, exchange. You've been observing us. We wish to observe you. It's only fair. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. I haven't been observing anyone. I'm a wildlife biologist. I study animals' ecosystems. A sound came then, that same clicking language I'd heard the previous night, but this time with undertones of what might have been amusement, might have been contempt. Your instruments, the voice said when the clicking subsided. Your measures and markers. Your samples. Did you think we wouldn't notice? Wouldn't understand? We've been here long, before your kind learned to make fire, Ranger Parker. Long before you gave yourself that name, or any name at all. The seismic monitors, the atmospheric testing equipment, the geological core samples I've been ordered to collect last spring, standard equipment for any mountain outpost, part of the ongoing environmental and geological studies conducted throughout the park system. Those are for scientific research, I said. Environmental monitoring. Nothing to do with whatever you are. They are intrusions, the voice replied, an edge entering its perfect modulation. Violations. You study what you do not understand without permission, without exchange. We have decided this must change. A different kind of knocking came then, not on the door, but on the walls of the cabin. All walls simultaneously. A rhythmic pounding that shook dust in the rafters, rattled dishes in their cupboards. And voices, dozens of them, calling my name, repeating the phrases I'd heard. Let us in. We're cold. We're lost. A chorus of entreaties, all in that same perfect modulation that never quite synced with what I knew human speech should sound like. I grabbed my radio, desperately adjusting frequencies, try and find an emergency channel that would connect directly to the main station despite weather interference. Mayday! Mayday! Blackwood Outpost requesting immediate assistance. Under siege by unknown entities. Repeat, unknown entities attempting to breach the outpost. Only static answer me. The transmission swallowed by whatever forces were gathered outside my cabin. The pounding intensified, the voices rising in volume until they were nearly screaming, a cacophony of perfect modulation that drove me to cover my ears, to retreat to the center of the cabin's main room. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Complete silence fell, broken only by my ragged breathing, and a renewed patter of rain beginning to fall outside. We only want equilibrium, said the original voice, now coming from directly outside the window near where I stood. You observe us. We observe you. You take samples of our home. We take samples of yours. Balance. Exchange. I turned slowly to face the window. She stood outside, the woman who wasn't a woman, her unfinished face now inches from glass, features arranged in what might have been an attempt at a smile. Behind her, at the edge of visibility in the light spilling from the cabin, stood others, dozens of them, all with that same rawness of proportion, that same unfinished quality to their features, all watching me with eyes that reflected the cabin lights with an unnatural metallic gleam. Go away, I said. my voice barely audible even to myself. "Leave me alone." The knot woman pressed her hand against the glass. 5 fingers, but jointed wrong. Too many segments, moving in ways that human fingers couldn't bend. "One sample," she said, the approximation of a smile widening until it split her face in a way that defied anatomical possibility. "One exchange, then equilibrium. Then we leave you to your watching as you leave us to ours." "What kind of sample?" I asked, already knowing the answer, already feeling the cold certainty of what they wanted. Her hand moved against the glass, fingers bending backward at impossible angles, tracing patterns that left faint, glowing trails and condensation. "A small piece only," she said. "Tissue, blood, material for study, just as you have taken from the mountain, from our home. And if I refuse?" The patterns her fingers traced began to glow more brightly, taking on a phosphorescent blue-green tint that illuminated her unfinished face from below, casting it in an eldritch light that emphasized its wrongness. "Then we take what we need," she said simply, "and more besides. Equilibrium must be maintained. The balance must be restored." Around the cabin, those others began to move closer, emerging from shadow into the spill of light from the windows, all with that same unfinished quality, that same wrongness of proportion and movement, all watching with that metallic gleam in 2 large eyes. I understood then with perfect clarity that I had no choice, that whatever these beings were, ancient inhabitants of the mountain, entities from some adjacent reality, something else entirely, they would take what they wanted regardless of my cooperation. Better to give willingly, to establish the boundaries of this exchange while I still had some agency, than to resist and potentially lose far more. "How do we do this?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. The knot woman's approximation of a smile widened further, the horizontal line splitting vertically now as well, creating a cross-shaped opening in her face that should have exposed bone and tissue, but showed only darkness within. "Open the door," she said. "Invite us in. We will be quick, precise. We have had much practice." Every instinct screamed against it. Every protocol, every training scenario, every rational thought argued for maintaining the barrier between myself and whatever waited outside. Yet I knew, with that same cold certainty, that the barrier was an illusion, that if they wanted to enter, truly wanted to breach the cabin, no lock or wall would stop them. They were allowing me this choice, this semblance of control, perhaps as part of their concept of equilibrium. I moved to the door, unlatched it with hands that trembled only slightly, and opened it wide. She stood on the porch now, though I hadn't seen her move from the window. Behind her, those others remained at the clearing's edge, watching, waiting. "Invite us," she repeated, her voice modulating strangely on the final word, dropping to a register no human voice could reach. "Come in," I said, stepping back, creating space between us. "Take your sample, then leave." She entered with that same unnaturally fluid motion I first observed, crossing the threshold with a single step that covered more distance than should have been possible. Up close, the wrongness of her was even more apparent. The unfinished quality of her features, the 2 sharp angles of her joints, the way her clothing hung on her frame as if draped over an armature that only approximated human form. "Your hand," she said, extending her own, those too many jointed fingers splayed in what might have been meant as a gesture of reassurance. "This will be quick." I extended my right hand, palm up, a supplicant preparing for stigmata. She took it in both of hers, her skin cold, not the chill of outdoor temperature, but a deeper cold, as if her interior ran at some temperature far below what human flesh could sustain. From somewhere within her clothing, she produced what looked like a small glass vial and what might have been a scalpel, though both had that same unfinished quality as her features. as if they were concepts of these tools rather than the actual objects. "A small piece only," she repeated, positioning the scalpel above my palm. "For study, for understanding." The cut was swift, precise, and far less painful than I expected. A line across my palm that beaded with blood almost instantly. She pressed a vial to the wound, collecting the blood with methodical care, her eyes fixed on the process with what might have been scientific detachment, might have been hunger, when the vial was half filled. She sealed it with a motion too quick to follow, then produced what looked like a small cloth, pressing it to my palm. "Healing," she said, and I felt a brief, intense cold at the site of the cut, followed by a tingling sensation that spread up my arm to my shoulder before receding. When she removed the cloth, the cut was closed, not healed completely, but sealed as if it had been expertly sutured, the edges of the wound pressed together with perfect precision, equilibrium.